If everybody could please come to order. This is the July 6, 2020 work session of the Billings City Council. Welcome everyone. I hope everyone had an enjoyable and safe July 4th weekend and had a good time with family and friends. Welcome back to real life. And before we begin, I'll just address the public and remind the public that they'll have an opportunity for public comment tonight after each of our three agenda items. First, our COVID-19 update. Second, the Billings Heights Business Association. And third, our public safety mill levy discussion. We'll open up for public comment. And the way that people can be heard is to call the call-in phone number at that time, not now, but later, 237-6196. That number again, 237-6196, and you'll be put in a phone queue at that time. At the very end, you'll have an opportunity also to comment on things that are not on the agenda. If you'd like, we'll give you 3 minutes. We just need your name and address. Why don't we then begin? And before we do, I'll just remind council members of our procedure. Because this technology usually works very well, but not always. If you do find yourself dropped from our Zoom call, we can all cooperate we won't have any votes tonight because this is a work session, but if we did have votes, if other council members can help me by scanning and seeing if any of your fellow ward members, for example, are missing and alert us before we go into a vote, we can pause the meeting at that point. Also, if you can just generally watch out for each other and again, alert me. If you are dropped, call that call-in number and talk to our clerk. That call-in number again being the public 237-6196 number, which is on your agenda. And that will alert our clerk that there's a problem. And then we will try to pause the meeting at least briefly if we can. If it looks like the technical difficulties are going to take a while to resolve, then we'll ask the council member to call the phone number, which is on the invite that you receive for each one of these meetings. You won't be visibly seen, but we'll be able to hear you. And then you'll just have to interject instead of raising your hand when you would like to be recognized. So with that, we'll move ahead. Our first thing up tonight, before we get into our regular agenda, I'd like to ask our city administrator who has some things he'd like to pass on to us. So we'll turn it over to Chris Kukulski. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So first up, Dave Mumford. I see Dave is there. There he is. And Dave would like the floor for a couple minutes. So I first would like to turn it over to him. And then I'd like to say a few words after that, and then kind of go from there. As far as I don't have things outside of what's on the regular agenda tonight, and the issue Dave's going to talk to you about. So I don't have anything else for my administrative report, but I'd like to, say, comment after Dave. So if I could turn it over to Dave Mumford, that'd be great.
Great, Dave, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and I really want to thank Chris for providing me this opportunity to address all of you. For those who don't know, I retired last Friday. I am no longer working with the city. I wanted this opportunity to thank all of you, the Mayor, all of the Council, the respect and support that you have given me has been more than I could have asked for. The same with past mayors and councils. This has been a job that is more than you could ever ask for, both good and bad. But it has been a great challenge, and I believe that with the staff of Public Works in the last almost 20 years, I'm leaving the department in a better place than when I came, and I even believe the city's in a better place than when I came. And I couldn't have done that without all of you. Your support and vision to see a better Billings is amazing. I hope you continue it. I hope you provide whoever follows me with that same respect and courtesy you've all given me over the years. There's some great projects to go. The reservoir, I hope it's when it's done, I hope it's the vision you want, which is that it's a community project, not just the water that we need, but also what'll attract people to come to Billings to live because of the great recreational provide to it, and the composting program and all the other things that we've been working on and doing. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you. You mean a lot to me. I know there are times that we probably frustrated each other, but you've always been terrific to me and to Public Works, and I really appreciated the opportunity Chris gave me to say that to all of you. You mean a lot to me, and Billings has been my family's home and will continue to be, and if I can do anything to support something the council wants to do in the future, please don't hesitate to ask me. I still will be here and will always be here. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Before we hand it back to Chris, you have my permission to unmute and do as best we can to give us rounding standing ovation to our outgoing Public Works Director. So, Dave, it's all yours.
Thank you.
We apologize. It's not quite the same as doing that in person, but you deserve our greatest appreciation and admiration for many, many years of faithful and very competent service. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Chris, because I know he wanted to have some comments as well.
Thanks, Mayor. And Dave, as he and I have gotten to talk about, I mean, we've had barely 18 months that we've gotten to work together, but without a question, the respect that the community has for the Public Works Department, the respect that you guys have for him and his innovative approaches, not being afraid to think outside the box and do things extraordinary for the benefit of our community. He has large shoes to fill. Probably one of the, I think, best compliments I can give Dave is who he has put in place, right? We have Debbie Melling as our city engineer, Jennifer DeRay as our deputy director, Louis Engel overseeing both our water and wastewater plants. And so we're in a situation here where, with Dave's departure, as short as the notice is, the good news is we can operate for several months with the leadership that he is in place. Had an opportunity to meet this morning with some of those leaders, and we will be very deliberate, but fortunately we will not be in a rush to figure out what is best for ultimately the department and the city. So currently, we'll work our way through that process, and we'll be communicating with Public Works employees tomorrow so that they understand kind of who they report to and how that works. But the structure that Dave has set up, the support he's gotten from prior administrators and elected officials, put us in a situation where we are not in a panic as a result of Dave's retirement notice. With that, though, again, I would like to thank him. He's welcomed me into this organization, was someone amongst our leadership team who was not afraid to put his opinions out there, whether he and I agreed immediately with each other or other directors or not. That wasn't the point. The point was, how do we improve and make for a better Billings? And to that, we will miss him on our leadership team. I know his peers will miss him. But thankfully, like many, he's going to stay in Billings, at least for the near future, and we'll be able to call on him and tap him from time to time for continued assistance. So, Dave, let me personally, again, thank you. Thank you for your nearly 20 years of service to the citizens of Billings. It is, without a question, in better condition than it was 20 years ago. And I believe these upcoming 5, 10, 20 years, your fingerprints and the people you've put in place will continue to lead the department and our city in a very positive way. So thank you, Dave.
Thank you again. It looks like we might have some questions. I hope you'll stick around for a while, Dave, and let us buy you a cheap chocolate cake or something at some point as a better send off. But Councilmember Ewell. Oh, Councilmember Ewell, you're muted.
Just want to thank Dave for all his innovation and leading the Public Works Department. The big steps you made at the waste trash place, solid waste. And just to make it short, Dude Lake, West Fork of Rock Creek Trail, place to start, Dave.
Good suggestion.
This is a great time of year to be retired, that's for sure. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Dave, I just wanted to share with you that, first of all, I was devastated when I heard the news that you were retiring. And really want to thank you, having spent the last 2.5 years with you as a department director, and your openness to me for the past 2.5 years. Anytime I had a question or picked up the phone to call you or send an email, you responded so quickly, as did your staff. And I'm so grateful for that. And I wanted to share with you that time that we saw each other in Lucky's, I saw you for a while before I approached you. And I wanted you to know that my first thought as I was watching you in Lucky's was, there are too few people in this store that know that this man is a hero in our community. And that was my thought as I stood there watching you in Lucky's and then went up to you. And I'll never forget that moment and watching you thinking that. And I just truly think you are a hero in our community, and what you've done and what you've given to our community. I am just so deeply grateful and honored to know you. And I look forward to continuing this friendship for years to come. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great. So Dave, we do wish you the very best, and stay in touch. I'm sure we will be taking advantage of you on occasion. So enjoy your retirement, enjoy your grandchild, and this beautiful summer that you have ahead of you. So again, let's close out with another one of these funny, awkward virtual ovations for Mr. Mumford.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks again. Then we'll move ahead with our regular agenda, and as a lead into that, because it does involve an update on COVID-19, I wanted to update the council that and advise them that I released a media release to the press this afternoon on the subject of COVID-19. And I'd like to read that to the members of the council, but also members of the public who might be watching. As most people know, we are now seeing a significant surge in our numbers of COVID-19 cases compared to our very, very low numbers from roughly 3 weeks ago. And so the release reads as follows: I call on all residents of Billings and Yellowstone County to abide by the directives of our public health officials in order to slow the spread of the coronavirus. We should all renew our efforts and follow the advice of medical professionals that worked before and will work again. Stay home if you are sick. Avoid crowds and activities when 6 feet of separation cannot be maintained. Wash your hands frequently and cover your mouth and nose to prevent spreading droplets, presumably with a mask or other face covering. 1/3 of all COVID-19 cases reported in Yellowstone County were diagnosed in just the last week. 45 new cases were reported in Montana on Sunday, 16 of which were in Yellowstone County. That's 35.5%, more than double our percentage share of the state's population. Yellowstone County has by far the most active cases in the state with 140, far ahead of number 2 Gallatin County with 76. Increasingly, it is young people who are coming down with the disease. Of the 16 people who were newly diagnosed on Sunday, 7 were in their 20s, and all but 2 were under 60. It is unrealistic to expect that the elderly and those in high-risk groups, about 25% of all American adults, should simply seal themselves off from the rest of us in a COVID-free cocoon. If we get sick, and especially if we get sick and don't know we're sick, we put the most vulnerable at risk along with all our friends, family, and coworkers. That's why masks and face coverings are very important. Whenever we are in indoor public spaces, have contact for more than just a minute or two, and cannot maintain a safe 6-foot separation. Face coverings are a minor inconvenience that protects everyone else and ourselves. And that's why I strongly encourage everyone to wear a mask or face covering in those situations, and to patronize businesses that wear a mask or face covering, and to patronize businesses that require masks and face coverings for employees who deal with the public. Together we can lick this thing, but it's going to take time, patience, and a lot of love for others. So with that, I'll turn it over. We do have an update on the COVID-19 situation from our County Health Officer, John Felton, followed by Steve Arviskow on the economic situation. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Felton. John, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of Council, it's good to be back in front of you, although I certainly wish it was with better news. As the Mayor indicated, we have obviously seen a surge in cases over the last week or so. 87 of our cases have occurred within July, which is in the 6th day of July. And that is 1/3 of all the cases we've had in Yellowstone County since the first case arrived on March 13th. Some other concerns, we know that we had cases in at least 7 long-term or assisted living facilities. Those, as we've always talked about, are extremely high-risk populations. That led to me issuing a health officer order on Friday. It became effective midnight on the 4th of July. That reinstated the visitor prohibitions at long-term or senior living facilities such as long-term cares, memory care, and assisted living. It does allow, as the governor's directive allowed, compassion visits for end-of-life care, although we do require that those individuals be masked if they're in those facilities. Those, we've talked a lot about, those are extremely high-risk populations, and so it's certainly a concern that we have cases. We've done a really good job as a community, and particularly our long-term care facilities, in keeping cases out of those facilities up till now. But as people are out and about more, as we predicted with the beginning of having more activity, we'd see more cases. In terms of the burden on our healthcare system, as of 1 o'clock this afternoon, we had 15 hospital inpatients in Yellowstone County. None of those patients were in the intensive care unit. None of those patients were on ventilators. Right now we have 149 active cases, which is about 1/4 of the active cases in the state. We do, though, have 15 of the, about 3/4 of the hospitalized patients are hospitalized in our community. Not all of those are from Yellowstone County, but we do have the significant proportion of the hospitalized patients. There was a call this morning with Senator Daines that included me and the mayor and representatives, leaders of our 2 hospitals, who made quite clear, as we've known, that there is additional capacity for more patients if that's necessary, both in terms of med-surg beds, or what we think of as regular hospital beds, intensive care beds, and ventilators. But obviously that number is growing, and we're certainly concerned with the having those cases in the long-term care facilities. Typically, you would start to see a lot of severe disease several weeks after people become ill. So we'll be watching that very carefully. In terms of where do we think this is coming from? Yes, indeed, we are doing more testing. What we're seeing is that Most of the cases, though, aren't coming from surveillance testing or testing of asymptomatic people. It's coming from people who are ill and seeking care, as well as their contacts. Early on in this situation, we had typically 1 to 3 contacts per case, but you'll recall that was during our stay-at-home time, so people weren't out and about much. Now we are routinely seeing 5 to 10 and sometimes more contacts per case. Most of those contacts, and these are close contacts, so that's defined as either they live in the household or they are people that have contact with a known person within the time they believe to be infectious for 15 minutes or more within 6 feet or less. So it's not anyone who has incidental contact. These are close contacts. But when we start thinking about 5 to 10 contacts per person, with 100, and say round numbers, 150 active cases, you can do the math and realize that is a very significant number of people who are placed into quarantine or isolation for that 14-day period. So it is clearly a concern. We continue to follow the CDC guidelines and recommendations of strongly encouraging masking when people are in crowds where you can't assure physical distancing. So when people are in stores or in larger crowds, I think as we look at where our cases are coming from, many of them are linked to group gatherings. Some of those are family gatherings, such as birthday parties and barbecues and weddings. But that's part of the reason that we're seeing significantly more cases. And I believe the largest part is the fact that people are out and about and congregating much more extensively. I think one of the things that is really getting a lot of attention is the masking question, as to whether or not we should issue an order mandating masking. You'll note that the governor hasn't done that. Other health officers haven't done that. It's got a lot of issues. We've really worked closely with the business community, and I'm sure Steve will talk about this, but our business community has really stepped up, much as the mayor has, and really encouraged people to make that decision to protect other people and protect our community. An order carries with it some pretty significant compliance or enforcement issues. And I would just remind everyone that the violation of a health officer order isn't a citation. It's not like a speeding ticket. It's a crime. So that means that law enforcement and the county attorney have to be the enforcer. Public health does not have the authority to write someone a citation or arrest somebody for violating the order. That goes to law enforcement, and the county attorney requires, just like any crime, the law enforcement investigation, the filing of charging documents by the county attorney. People need to be served with those documents, in essence, arrested, although I'm quite confident they wouldn't be jailed, but they need to be served with those documents. Then it has to go before a judge. It's a court issue because, again, it's a crime. It's not like a citation. So there are some significant issues there. The CDC has taken the position of strongly recommending masking. We're in the same boat with them. The order that I made on Friday was very measured and focused on where we believe the highest risk is, which is those long-term care facilities. We'll continue to watch those very carefully. I think, at this point, what we're really concerned about is, people are still out and about as we would expect. I have mentioned several times, I think I talked about this at the press event on Friday, that even if everybody suddenly figured out today to start wearing masks, we're in for a very rough few weeks. The cases that are coming up now have been baked in, if you will, in the last several weeks. So it takes a few weeks to actually see the impact of that. So we really need people to get on board and do their part to keep us all as safe as possible. With that, I will stop and turn it back to the mayor and I don't know if you want to have Steve talk first or answer questions, or how we'd like to manage that.
Yeah, let's hear from Steve first and hold questions, and then we'll deal with the questions after Steve's had an opportunity to give his report. Steve Arviscow.
Mayor Cole, members of council, Mayor, this evening, we were going to have Councilman Sean Brown introduce the topic of our recovery plan, and I was going to take a chunk of time to walk through that plan. So we may want to engage with John just on the issues he's presenting us, and then dive in to the recovery plan. I can add that the business community did indeed work with John Felton last week, and we did issue a statement Thursday morning regarding the wearing of masks and the precaution that we think is a necessity in terms of keeping our businesses open and safe. And so that statement was issued. Chris, I don't know if council received a copy of that statement, but we can certainly get a copy of that to you. And I would just echo the words of John Brewer, Lily Corning, other members of our team who spent a lot of time with John Felton on Thursday. This is a step we can take that will keep our business doors open. And it's something that has some validity behind it, and something we can all do. Seems pretty easy, but maybe wrought with a little discomfort or controversy, whatever the case may be. We know that it will help our business community sustain its recovery. And so we would encourage everybody, when you cannot maintain that physical distancing of at least 6 feet, we'd encourage you to wear a mask. I had to do that a handful of times today. And so just like the rest of us, I'm kind of learning that new habit. We think the adoption of that habit will produce dividends for our business community. So that's our encouragement.
Thank you, Steve. We did receive a copy of that statement, so we appreciate you issuing that. Since your report on your recovery plan with Councilmember Brown may take a while, and we don't want to hold John Felton any longer than necessary, I agree with that suggestion. So are there any questions for John Felton? Councilmember Ewald and the Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor.
And the Councilmember Brown.
John, how does a person fall off the active list?
CDC has several definitions of recovery. Some have to do with time and some have to do with testing. So it sort of depends on what the situation is. So for the time example, it would be that they're at least 10 days from the onset of symptoms and at least 72 hours without symptoms, absent any treatment. So no fever-reducing medications, things like that. So there are specific CDC definitions of what recovery means.
Okay, and one follow-up question, Mayor.
Sure.
Does this seem kind of coincidental that it's approximately 3 weeks since the protest started and it spread clear across the country?
You know, we are seeing cases linked to all kinds of activities, as well as some just community spread that we can identify links to. Anytime people congregate, there is increased risk of spread of disease for respiratory disease.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Shaw and the Councilmember Ronning, and then Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, John. Great information. You mentioned there's cases in 7 long-term living communities. Are the jail and prison included in those, in that category, or are they their own separate category? How are things going on in those 2 confined spaces? Thanks.
Yeah, those are the 7 are senior living type facilities. So we did have the outbreak in the jail back, I believe it was somewhere around the 10th or 12th of June, something like that. And since then, we've not had cases in the jail. There was the Department of Corrections, you'll recall, did issue a statement that there were several cases in the women's prison that were identified through surveillance testing. They later determined that those were false positives. So at this point, I'm not aware of any cases in either the jail or the Montana women's prison.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ronning and Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. 2 things, John. One is, it's my understanding that the contact tracing has been able to determine that many of the cases that we're seeing throughout the country are mostly associated with gatherings like weddings, graduation parties, barbecues, things like that. That's been my understanding. And then two, if you could comment on that. And then two, when someone contacts us about COVID situations in the city, and I think Riverstone Health, because I don't know how else to ask this question other than just to ask it. So I've been approached about the issue happening at Alternatives, and I'm assuming Riverstone Health knows about that. So Alternatives is under, as I understand, the Department of Corrections. Who do we pass information on to? Do we pass information on to you, or do we pass information on to a state legislator or onto Department of Corrections? Who do we pass information on to? Thank you.
So I'm sorry to say, I think I've already forgotten your first question. The Alternatives is a private nonprofit. Much of their business is with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and the Montana Department of Corrections, but they're an entity, a private nonprofit entity. We are made aware of any case of any person who resides in Yellowstone County, and we follow up with those. We certainly don't get into any sort of detail about who those people are, but any case that involves a person who resides in Yellowstone County, we are aware of, and we follow up with the contact tracing and contact identification. I would just sort of add to that is kind of, we've obviously seen a large number of cases. One of the things the mayor opened this meeting with was, I hope everyone enjoyed a restful and calm holiday weekend. I can tell you that for 18 Riverstone Health staff who worked all weekend long, it was not calm or restful. One of the things that we try to do, of course, is get to cases as quickly as possible. As of this morning, all the cases received through Saturday had been, the interview had been completed and the contacts had all been identified and notified and talked to. And so today we were starting on yesterday's cases, which is kind of the way, what we shoot for, because we tend to get a lot of the cases identified later in the day. But we have had to have a large number of people, as I said, work over the holiday weekend. We are building very rapidly through hiring temporary staff to do contact tracing. And as we look at expanding our testing capacity, we're hiring staff for that as well. And I'm sorry, Council Member, I forgot your first question.
That's okay. It was just about, it's been my understanding that the majority of cases throughout the country that have been shown to be positive in the last few weeks when we've seen that spike have been related to weddings and barbecues and graduation parties and things like that nature, as people have been coming out of their homes and congregating in different types of social atmospheres, such as those things I shared.
Yes, that's been our experience, is that most of what we're seeing are related to various activities. There's some that are related to transportation. There's some that are related to people who drive and travel together. There are some cases that are related to workplaces. And I think the important thing to remember is, regardless of why people congregate, when people congregate, there's increased risk of the spread of disease. And I think the other thing I would mention here is we try to be very careful to talk about keeping distance from anyone who's not a household contact. I think too many people think of that as families. So, if I have a family reunion with 100 people from 17 different states, yes, we're all family. We are definitely not household contacts. So anyone who is a household contact, that you're with frequently, you don't need to worry about the 6 feet distance for there. But non-household contacts is where we need to maintain the distance.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese, you still got a question? Councilmember Purington?
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for answering my questions in my email. That was helpful. Just to clarify, and maybe you can get this information to me later, but you mentioned 5 to 10 contacts per case. So roughly, about, we could actually have 1,500 people if those contacts are positive, which of course then they would have had contacts as well. So that could potentially be a pretty large number that could expand here fairly quickly. Is Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, yes, you did. So what we're seeing, Councilmember Neese had asked how many people are in quarantine right now, or been identified as contacts, I guess is the specific question. We do have that list, but it's spread out over a bunch of different desks right now. So I just told our staff to maintain their attention to contact tracing and identification, and then we'll update the list. But I think that's an important factor when we talk about people being more active, is that's not considering incidental contacts. Those are people who are identified as close contacts, and most of those folks need to be put into quarantine, and they need to monitor for symptoms if they're asymptomatic. If they become symptomatic, then testing becomes a high priority. But those numbers are right. With 150 active cases, we very possibly have somewhere between 500 and 1,500 people who are in quarantine. Those are folks who aren't going to work, kids who aren't participating in activities, families that are locked down. So those numbers get very large very quickly.
And Mayor, a quick follow-up.
Sure.
And John, you mentioned about the masks. There's been a lot of questions about masks and indoor versus outdoor and things like that, whether it's preventing the droplets. I think there's some airborne type stuff as well. So my understanding is you're still recommending masks outdoors in gatherings, maybe not outdoors walking down the street, but outdoors if you have people that for instance, like the 4th of July fireworks, there was a lot of people congregating around there. So you would have advocated wearing masks during the 4th of July celebration, even though it was outdoors, and correct?
Right. We would advocate for masking anytime that physical distancing cannot be consistently maintained.
Okay, so if, for instance, if you did maintain your distance in your outdoor activity, your close contacts, your what do you call them, your family contacts,
Household contacts.
Household contacts. If you maintain your household contacts and stay 6 feet away from everyone else, no need to wear a mask. That distance between those different parties are fine as far as the airborne not being able to effectively get the other group. Does that
Right.
sound correct?
Yep, that's what we'd be interested in. Is if anytime that you are closer than 6 feet to people who are not your household contacts, we would strongly encourage masking.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington?
Thanks, John, for the updates. I had just, excuse me, I had just become aware that today, one of the long-term or assisted living facilities, they thought possibly 50 residents had become infected. Also 15 employees. And those 15 employees, they move around to different facilities. So how are these employees, how are they screened? Same for the visitors. How are they screened whenever they come into these? Because it may just be a husband at home and he goes to see his wife who's in, one of these facilities. So I'm kind of concerned about this blanket rule. Are there exceptions to those rules? So I guess that was kind of a multi-question thing.
So in terms of screening, I think most of the, I'd be confident saying the long-term care facilities are all, when they could admit visitors, they were screening those visitors for symptoms, travel history, the kinds of, and if anyone at home has been tested and is awaiting results, or anyone at home has been diagnosed with COVID-19, those are the standard screenings that are done for employees in healthcare facilities, as well as I'm sure the visitors were getting the same screening. With respect to staff who move between multiple long-term care facilities, that is fairly common, as I'm sure you know. A lot of those folks work full-time at one or part-time at several, or full-time at one and part-time at another. And so it's really important that they were screening as they went from place to place. But it is a high-risk environment. So in terms of the order itself, it's a combination of trying to address the risk to that population and the risk of asymptomatic spread. And what happens is once you get into a long-term care population of vulnerable people, it can spread very rapidly. We think about, for instance, we have several memory care or dementia type facilities. It's just not a reasonable expectation that people with dementia, many of whom are quite mobile, will be able to follow instructions for keeping distance and masking and things like that. That's just clinically not likely. So I completely understand how difficult it is for people. I can put myself in that boat. I have a 94-year-old mom who's in assisted living in Seattle that I cannot go see. She has medical issues. Well, she's 94 to begin with, but she has medical issues which make it likely that it's a toss-up if she sees 2021. And the question is, will we be able to visit her? So I completely understand that. The risk of having extensive disease spread is what makes those kinds of decisions not only difficult, but important. And that was we did discuss that as part of the Unified Health Command meeting. We had Unified Health Command commander meetings on the night of last Thursday and during the day on Friday. And we felt that was the best response to take at this time. And so that was my orders to manage that.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, John. So when the staff, if they do move among these different facilities, do the facilities themselves have the same type of screening requirements? I'm aware that some that are working construction in some of these facilities, they're tested 3 times a day. They're there all day, but they're tested 3 times a day. Are the staff tested that intensely as well?
Tested or screened? I would guess I would want to clarify.
Well, I guess it'd be screened. That should be the word that I'm using, is screened.
Yeah, I don't know with specificity what each one of those facilities do. They're like any other business. They have the authority to make their own operating decisions. But I don't know if they're screening those staff multiple times a day. I think probably what a lot of them do is what we do. We screen our employees upon arrival, and we make sure that everyone is well informed that if any of that changes, we need to know and we need to take action.
Thank you, John. We should probably move ahead because we still need to hear from Steve Arviska. I want to go back to Councilmember Tricky. Just one quick one before we do, though. Driving here to this meeting, I was listening to a story on the radio where the city of Phoenix has made its librarians available for contact tracing and its parks employees. That's such an important task, and it's becoming a very difficult burden for limited staff resources at Riverstone, I'm sure. So should we be having a conversation about making our Swiss Army knife librarians who can do anything, and maybe a few council members, contact tracers?
Well, we certainly are using a lot of our staff to do that. I was just looking at something here that came from one of our local physicians today. And it's interesting you brought up Arizona. The rate per 100,000 last week for Montana was 4.7. So we had new cases. It's an incident rate of 4.7 per 100,000. Arizona is at 47 per 100,000. So yeah, there's a lot more people, but their rate is 10 times the rate we're seeing here. I feel like we've got a lot of work to do, and I can't imagine doing 10 times that.
Okay, well, if you need assistance, call Chris Kukulski.
We'll go to the library.
Councilmember Cheriki, and then why don't we wrap up and hear from Steve Arvisko and Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, so basically following up on Mayor Cole's line of thought there, what can the city council be doing right now to help you? Do you want a resolution, screaming at people to start wearing masks? Should we set aside some money to put out some public service announcements? I wear a mask when I remember to, which is most of the time, but most of the time when I'm out there, I am not seeing people wearing masks. And I don't think, well, I think that these announcements that we're making will help a little bit. It seems to me that we should probably be doing more to drive that point home. I mean, it doesn't take long for us to go from 4 per 100,000 to 47 per 100,000.
Right, I completely agree. So I think ongoing information is critical. We've been looking here at the best venue to get that information out in. And so we're looking at some things you think of as sort of typical, guest opinion pieces in the newspaper and PSAs and things like that. I would point out that in Yellowstone County, almost half of the cases we've had, half of the 270 or whatever that number is now, are between 20 and 39. And so I think we need to look at, and we're working on this, look at communication channels that are more likely to be effective with that group of people. So I'm not sure that the newspaper and other things like that are the best we go. So I think from the city, any efforts that you can add to communicating with the general population, particularly that younger group, of the importance of taking care of their fellow residents is important. And that will likely require some money. I think the other thing is modeling. You know, Riverstone Health has a universal masking requirement. If you're on our campus, if you're in any of our buildings, you must be masked. We did that in part because we also are opening up and we're seeing many more people. But also it's important that we are a model. And I think leaders across the community need to model what it means to keep our community safe. And so, you know, one of my nightmare scenarios is being someplace and forgetting my mask and being seen, because I think that is a bad message. So, you know, I can't honestly say that I love wearing a mask, but I do. When I walk out of my office to go to the Coke machine, I wear a mask, even if all I'm doing is walking to the machine and back, because our policy is very restrictive. In our organization, our policy is when you're in our buildings, you're masked unless you're in an office by yourself, you are on the telephone with someone who tells you I can't understand you, or you're eating or drinking, in which case you're socially, appropriately physically distanced from those others in the room. That's it. So when people see folks on our campus, they see people wearing masks. I think it's really important for leaders to lead by example.
Well,
Okay,
that makes me feel better about going back to my car whenever I go to the post office and haven't forgotten my mask.
Good for you. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Again, thank you for your staff, and especially over this weekend. They're really doing yeoman service, and we appreciate it. The whole community appreciates it. Let us know how we can help.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Okay. Thank you, John. Let's turn it back to Steve Arbuscow and Councilmember Brown. Steve, you want to lead us through the economic recovery information?
Happy to do that. I think we wanted to, Sean has the opportunity to serve on our economic response recovery team. As you know, he's also appointed as ex officio on the Big Sky Economic Development Board. So I wanted maybe give Sean a chance to introduce this topic and share from your experience and the work that we've done over the last several weeks. And then I'll take just a little bit of time and kind of walk through the draft recovery plan. We're in the mode where we're just sharing that with every group that'll stand still for 20 minutes and just getting feedback before we finalize that plan. Sean.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. Thanks, Steve. You kind of took my introduction of it away, but I do want to just say, I really want to tell everybody or let everybody know that, you know, this committee is pretty impressive. You know, mostly developed to business owners, but the hospital management is involved and, you know, other individuals. But I tell you, these guys are goal-oriented, they're focused, they're efficient. You know, within 2 meetings of starting this thing, we had identified that there was a huge need for information. not just on the COVID spread and everything else, but on what the government was doing, all the PPP information, different loans and grants, and all of that kind of stuff. And literally within a couple of weeks, a site had been developed with links and contacts and all of that for just about any question that you could have concerning, the COVID and the response to it. And then, very shortly on the heels of that, was folks trying to find help getting through those applications, to get those PPP loans, to get those grants, to get all of that. And again, this group came up with those resources and made them available. And, and that's just not a small feat. And, during all of that, also we've developed this plan, of short-term, mid-term, immediate needs, and even long-term recovery plans. But more importantly, not only are those plans and those goals there, but what does it look like when we achieve those? That's, to me, that's as important as anything else that happens. So I know that Steve will talk a lot more about that, but I will say that, the immediate needs changes almost daily now. With the way that things are going now, at first it was open and safe was a big thing that this group was involved with. Now it's masked, now it's safety again. It just kind of keeps moving around. But it's truly been an honor working with this group. I very much appreciate concise and to the point, and getting your goals and what those look like and moving on. So Steve, I know that you've led that, and I sure appreciate it. And it's all yours, sir.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate that. If I could share my screen, I'll walk through a quick presentation. I'll move through this a little bit quicker given the hour, and I know you still have some things on your agenda tonight. Let's see if that's going to work. So I've got to get you guys to enable me to share. What we want to do is to start, let's see if it's ready yet. Oh, here we go. Okay. I will click through this really quick. That's kind of the icon of the work that we've been doing. Let's see. I've got to advance this. Hold on. Oh, there we go. So I wanted to start here just to give you a sense of where we were before all this started. And I know you knew this. And so we went into last fall, and then we started going through our winter and then that early season. We were more worried about how many times we were going to shovel the driveway. And then all this became very real for us. But here's information from our economic pulse report that we did right at the turn of the calendar in January of 2020. It gave you a sense of what our unemployment rate was in October that fall at 2.9%, and that had hovered around 3%. Our GDP growth rate, you can look at that from 2014 through 2018. We don't yet have the 2019 numbers, but you can see we were on a little bit of an up and down path. Our GDP doesn't slowly move at 1% a year. It does kind of cycle with where our economy is going. And it finally took till 2018 to get back to numbers that were in excess of 2015. And so we were a little bit on a modest roller coaster with our overall economic activity. You can see how we stacked up in terms of our peers. Our median household income in Billings is a little bit, and it's just under 60,000 at 59,623. And that's how we stacked up amongst our peer communities. And then I hate to remind us, but we had this workforce challenge, and we were an older aging workforce, and we knew that going in. We knew that was something we've been working on for years, that 22% of our active workforce was 65 years or or older. And so we knew we had a workforce challenge and opportunity. So we had a strong, diverse economy, but we had things we had to address as a community going forward economically. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of our economic impact. I'll look at what's been happening in our total business and economic activity, what's been happening in employment, consumer behavior, and then community health. I had shared with you before that our community was one of the top-rated counties nationwide in terms of our vulnerability to being impacted by the downturn that came as a result of the public health decisions that had to be made. We were ranked 222nd most vulnerable out of a little over 3,000 counties. And there was a reason for that. And the reason really relates to their anticipated job loss in the most impacted sectors of the economy. And many of these sectors of the economy have a high prevalence in Yellowstone County. So because of that high prevalence, because of our role as a regional hub, our likelihood of being impacted based on this vulnerability assessment was high. And we've seen some of that, play out. This is a really hard chart to read, and so I apologize for that right up front. But I'll tell you that what it says is what were the unemployment claims by sector in our economy. And the one impacted the greatest was leisure activities. Secondly was self-employed. So those two categories, because we have a lot of self-employed small businesses that are single person shops or what have you, their claims were high, as was our leisure activities. And then third was trade and transportation. It gives you a sense of the sectors that were impacted greatest in Yellowstone County by virtue of measuring the unemployment claims. And then just some numbers that I would kind of leave with you to just give you a sense of not only how we were impacted, but how have we responded to those impacts by virtue of securing federal and state dollars to support our restart and recovery. So at our peak, we experienced about a little over 11,000 unemployment claims. That was about the mid-April timeframe. Currently, unemployed numbers in Yellowstone County is just under 6,700. So you can see that we've come down substantially from that peak in mid-April. Our businesses have responded by making a lot of applications to federal and state assistance. You can see the number there on the right-hand side. For the state of Montana, Montana secured just under $1.8 billion in PPP funding. I was able to find out some numbers specifically for Yellowstone County. Yellowstone County had 2,688 applications that received funding less than $150,000 for a total of about $94 million in PPP funding among those 26 or 2,700 recipients. There was a block of another 431 recipients in Yellowstone County that received in excess of $150,000 in PPP funding, not to exceed 10 million. And so it's anywhere of those 431, it's anywhere between 150,000 and 10 million. I don't have an aggregate total of how much additional dollars. So you can see Yellowstone County did receive a share of the PPP funding, and a little over 3,000 of our local businesses were able to be impacted in a positive way by those dollars. The state's coronavirus relief funds, that's the $1.25 billion. That's under the control of the state of Montana, the governor's team. Those dollars are being deployed in our state. The latest numbers that we have, it's about 5.5 million of the 1.25 billion have been deployed. That number is updating itself almost every day as applications come in. And I would take a side note to just say our whole discussion about masking and how businesses need to adapt to new requirements, new procedures. One of the grant applications in this coronavirus relief fund is the ability for businesses to get reimbursed for their out-of-pocket costs for that adaptation. So if a businesses need to start buying hundreds and hundreds of masks to cycle through those masks, if they keep track of that information and make application to the state, they can be reimbursed for that cost. And we're happy to help with that process. This just helps track consumer spending. This is a site called tracktherecovery.org. So if you have nothing to do one evening and you just want to know how things are going on around the country, go to tracktherecovery.org. You can get information specific to Montana and our county, as well as any community throughout the country. This tracks the recovery of consumer spending from January to the present time. And you can see Yellowstone County is tracking a little bit behind the state of Montana in terms of the level that we're at. We're still behind where we were in January. The state is about 10% behind, and we're yet still 16% behind in terms of what our economic activity or our consumer spending looked like in January. John Felton's team, wow, I don't know how much more to say about the work that he's really doing. It's so vital to where we're at, and his partnership with us has been absolutely tremendous. This is a site or a dashboard that his team keeps track of, and if it's all green, it's good. Red is not so good, and the red indicator here tells us that their ability to manage the investigations and contact tracing, as you've discussed earlier, is challenged right now. And so, Mayor, the whole let's volunteer our team to be helpful based on their indicators, that would be an important resource for us to think about. How can we support John's work going forward? One thing to keep in mind, the highlight, the little icon there on the upper right-hand side of the slide, our catchment area for healthcare is a population of 650,000 people. We don't only serve our local community, we serve our broader Montana region. We serve parts of northern central Wyoming, and we serve parts of western North Dakota. They all have traditionally come here for healthcare. That's in part why you see some of the hospitalizations related to COVID are non-Yellowstone County patients, because we are a catchment area, we are a regional hub for healthcare, which in most contexts, economically and otherwise, is good. It also puts pressure on us to an extraordinary position than other communities. The last little icon there, Montana ranked 46 among states, populations most vulnerable to COVID-19. If you're the #1 state, you're the most vulnerable. And I didn't make myself a note on which state is the most vulnerable, but clearly Montana ranks lower on that list. And it's because they generally feel, based on this metrics, that we are fiscally responsible, able to manage our economic impact, and then more generally, a healthy community and able to manage the public health impacts as well. So how have we responded to all that? Keeping in mind that we're monitoring this on an ongoing basis. As Sean had noted, we put together a team. There are about 50 of us on a call every Thursday at 3:30, and then we have subcommittee meetings throughout the week to deal with individual parts of the response. Many of them are private business owners. And as I've noted with council before, many of them are business owners who are managing their own business recovery while volunteering their time to add insight and expertise to the work that we're doing for the community. So they're really to be commended for that extra effort. We've broken our work off in those 4 areas. That's the focus of our area. We have subcommittees related to each of those 4 areas managed through this team structure. I can tell you the work that we've been doing is a lot of communication, both internal to our business community, making sure they're educated on the public health standards, making sure they access the resources that are available to them from the federal government, from their local banking institution, from the state of Montana, but also making sure we're spending time talking to each other so we're coordinating our response. We've sent several communications up to the Coronavirus Relief Fund, the governor's team, and early on his task force that has been looking at how to send those dollars out and deploy those dollars in the state. Our most recent communication to the state was June 24th. from this committee, and we were making recommendations on how to speed up the pace of deployment, ways that the governor's team could look at getting more information out, and then also some sensitivity to businesses that have been significantly impacted, like our hotel and accommodations, our events, etc. We gave the governor's team some insight on how best to respond to that. And I would highlight more recently that last bullet point on the page that's underlined: sustain the economic momentum, encourage, mask up. Boy, the last thing that I'm hearing of want from our business community is to go backwards. We absolutely can't afford to do that. So whatever we can do to be encouraging those practices, including wearing a mask, so vital to our economic response and recovery. If we go backwards, we're rethinking our whole plan and strategy in terms of how we address our economic recovery. And we're so hopeful that we don't have to do that. We can rally as a community to accomplish what we need to. Our goals for our recovery plan are as highlighted there. First is response and stabilization. Next is business recovery. And then third is building economic and community resiliency. And I'll cover those just very quickly for you. We've broken those goal areas into 3 stages. Response and stabilization we thought would be a 0 to 3 month endeavor. I actually think that's that kind of mode, that being responsive, is going to carry us through the balance of this year and beyond, perhaps, depending upon where our COVID-19 cases go. And then we'll then start to transition into that business recovery mode. And then thirdly, over the next 6 months to 3 years, we'll be in that building economic and community resiliency. And I'll highlight those 3 goal areas for you really quick. The first one you're very familiar with. It's the work that we've been doing, the open and safe. It's the collaboration that we've been doing, the direct support we've been trying to give to our business community. It's our open and safe effort, at focusing some resources on our hardest hit industries, and then helping our businesses interpret guidelines. And we're doing that on an ongoing basis. Our second area in terms of business recovery is more long-term in nature. It's helping to sustain the recovery effort by keeping our team intact. I was asked by a committee member, Steve, how long do I have to meet every week? And the short answer was, just continue to meet every week. But we know we need to keep a team together, communicating and focused. We'll likely be transitioning to every other week meetings and potentially every other month meetings as we kind of move through this process. But a core group of us need to stay engaged at the table so that we can be helping our business community transition through that. One of the things that we will do here is we have a cohort of about 30 businesses. We're going to be tracking their recovery experience over the next several months for those 30 businesses. They will be asked to do a survey, report the impact and their experience going forward, and then we'll report that information in the aggregate so you get an idea of how the recovery is going for a cohort of businesses that are representative of the different sectors that are most impacted by our economic downturn as a result of COVID-19. I'll finish up with this last piece. This is kind of the forward-looking piece. It doesn't feel like it today, like there's going to be opportunity in the future because we're on that roller coaster, and the chances of that stopping for us doesn't feel real to us right now. But we know there are things we need to do to be prepared. And so what we've developed is a set of guiding principles for this third goal area that I have listed there that are kind of really important to our opportunities for the future. I think last time we met, I reviewed some of these with you, so I'll skip over those and just highlight with you the tactics that we've identified that relate to these principles. That will be some of the work that we'll do in this third goal area of building economic and community resiliency. So those include seeking a common vision. We need our community leaders, our civic leaders, our business leaders to come together and think out loud together about what's our common vision for our economic future as we move from recovery to seeking opportunity. We additionally need to stay committed to certain things that are important to us economically. Our workforce development is very important. Our support for entrepreneurship, very important, that we stay committed to those fundamental things moving forward. And then we need to be willing to commit to strategic investment in the infrastructure of our community and the assets of our community that will make us a yet again more attractive community to attract private investment and talent. And I can tell you, I'm reading almost 3 or 4 articles a day, as some of you might be, about what the migration trends will look like as a result of how other larger communities have experienced the impacts of COVID-19. Smaller urban centers, smaller cities, micro cities will be in an opportunity to maybe attract some of that if they continue to invest in themselves and look to create that common vision moving forward. We also want to make sure as a community going forward that we capitalize on and support our regional hub for healthcare identity. Very important. I just read an article called Eds to Meds that I would show you from the International Economic Development Council. Communities that have a strong medical presence and a strong higher education presence will be in a very unique position going forward in terms of seizing new economic development opportunities. Well, we already have the strong healthcare hub. It's important for us to seize that and support that going forward. Talked about capturing the small metro. And then lastly, I would just highlight that one of our tactics is to make sure that we do our work beyond just ourselves, because we function as a regional trade center, that the work that we do should have a regional economic focus to it. So spending time meeting and talking with Miles City and Roundup and Glendive and Colstrip and other communities in our region about their economic recovery will just do, it'll feed our economic recovery as well. So those are some of the tactics that we've identified in this phase of our recovery plan. As we roll this out to the community, we're asking the community what their vision is for what they hope we look like going forward, what they want us to look like as a community, how we can unify around a common vision. And then we usually ask people for Q&A. And so that's the presentation we're giving to the community. If you have a group and you'd like us to present, we're happy to walk through that and then field Q&A as we take this draft plan and finalize it here over the next few weeks.
Thank you,
Mayor,
Steve.
Council, thank you for your patience.
You bet. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your efforts, your staff's effort, and the committee's effort. Obviously, that's a lot, and we're going to be looking at the results of this for years to come. Appreciate your efforts to try to make lemonade from this COVID lemon that we've been given, and it will hopefully reshape our economy in the future in a positive way. So thank you. That presentation probably went a little longer than ideally. So we'll try to keep questions on the short side, just because we have to get into the rest of our agenda. Questions for Steve or Councilmember Brown? Councilmember Neese.
I have 2 questions. I'll ask one unless someone else doesn't ask. I'll ask them a second. Steve, I've talked to a lot of businesses, both in Yellowstone County around the state in my work. And one of the things they tell me is that they're having a tough time finding workers because of the unemployment benefits are so much better. Is there anything this committee is doing to address that?
Councilman Neese, thank you. That is a question that has come up multiple times in our group. In our June 24th letter to the governor's team, recognizing that was a provision put in law by the feds, and some of that's due to expire soon. So you'll start to see, unless they extend that, you'll start to see that transition out within the next 30 days, I believe. In the meantime, we've asked the coronavirus task force fund managers, the team in Helena, to look at incentivizing reemployment, utilizing some resources instead of paying them a bonus just to stay home each week, that we look at reversing that and commit resources that an employer could use to incentivize them coming back to work. And so that was a recommendation we offered about 10 days ago to the governor's team. No response yet, but we have asked the governor to come to Billings and talk with our business community about issues like that. And we're in conference now with the scheduler in terms of figuring out when that visit can take place.
Okay, a quick follow-up on that, Mayor.
Sure.
We've talked to the governor, Steve. Have you been talking to the federal representatives to make sure they're hearing this as well, so they don't extend that?
Yeah, we had a call, as John Felton had noted, with Senator Daines today. We talked a little bit. I don't think we touched on this unemployment piece, but we can forward our communication to the governor to our federal delegation. We'll absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Steve? Then back to Councilmember Deese.
Thank you, Mayor. Steve, another question, like masks have been talked a lot about here when John was on. Businesses really have a lot of control over this. You know, you go to Costco, you got to wear a mask. You go to some of the banks, you got to wear a mask. John even said with Riverstone Health, you go to Riverstone Health, you got to wear a mask. What is this committee doing about really pushing that because they're going to control whether this spike really gets out of control, because they can control no shoot, no shirt, no service, no mask, no service, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What is this committee looking at, trying to get the businesses to participate in helping address the mask issue?
Councilman Deese, thank you. And our message that we sent out last Thursday morning was really targeted to the business community. Yes, it generally was consumed by all of us, either through the media or what have you, but it was really intended to encourage our business owners and leaders to adopt a policy that frankly allows them to stay open if they make a commitment for their employees to wear a mask. And to a certain extent, if they make that commitment to say, if you want to do business here, you need to wear a mask. We're not in a position to mandate that. And frankly, I'd be super cautious and concerned if we started to mandate that. But being able to continue to hammer that message home with our business community, as you've said, is absolutely vital. So we're looking at other ways to continue, just like we educated the business community on the tools and resources they could access. We'll look at starting to do that in a bigger way, all about masks. And there's no cost should not be an issue, because we can get reimbursed for that cost.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Maybe your slogan should not just be mask up, but hand up. Mask up, hand up. Some of the younger people I've talked to are really feeling insecure in their jobs in restaurants. And some of the attitude expressed is, why should we shut down our economy? Because some people are more vulnerable than we are, speaking as a 20-something-year-old. So I think maybe, maybe the message is, if you're helping with masks, you're helping to keep your own job. You're helping to keep your own economy recovering. And I don't think that's really, as you were talking about it, it struck me, yeah, this is about sustaining and recovering. It's not, so if a younger person is feeling a mask is uncool, they should also understand that's really a hand up in keeping our economy here in Billings going and recovering. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Good point. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. So Steve, I really appreciate your presentation, and I saw a mini version of this from Allison last week. So you're talking about businesses, and I guess my thought would be, have you talked about or talked to the governments also? Like, should this be, I mean, I know you're not wanting to mandate it, but maybe we lead by saying city government does this, our state government does this, our county government does this. Have you received pushback or cooperation or conversation with any of the governments that you have contact with?
Well, no one on this call. Well, I'm looking at people that are on the Zoom meeting today. No one's called me from here and said, "Are you kidding me?" And I can't say that I've gotten a call from the county saying, "What are you doing advocating masks?" I can say that there are different opinions on this issue. And so I just think you go into that with your eyes wide open. If we want to sustain our economy, create a new habit that does that. I don't like putting on my mask. I got a nice one, as I showed on TV the other day, and it's awkward. It looks funny. I can't breathe well. But I also want to make sure our economy keeps moving and that people stay healthy in the process. And I think that will help. Is that the only thing we can do? Absolutely not. There's some things we've outlined in our recovery plan that are very much forward thinking that frankly we need your commitment to long term. That's really important to us as well. But in the near term, donning a mask, doing those other practices, if you're young and healthy and you don't think you have a worry, at least do it, as Councilman Joy said, because it helps keep you employed and it helps sustain that business that you're a part of.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's probably, we've hit the high points there. So again, Steve, thank you, and to your committee and your staff. I wish this was the last time we hear from you, but I doubt it will be. So
I'm not sure why you're saying that. Thank you for so much of your time. I really appreciate your patience today. And Sean, and thank you for your help.
And yes, thank you very much, Councilmember Brown, for your efforts here. Okay, with that, we do need to open up for public comment. For anybody listening from the public on this item before we move to our second item, if you'd like to be heard, you can call that number 237-6196, 237-6196. The important thing to know here is that our meeting is actually ahead of what you are hearing. Therefore, you need to mute whatever it is you might be listening to the meeting on your television or your computer. Just listen to what the phone operator tells you and you'll be fine. And we'll need your name and we'll give you 3 minutes and ask you for address. Tony, our clerk tonight, do we have anybody who has called to 237-6196?
I have not received any calls.
Okay. I purposely droned on there for a while to give them time to catch up. And I think,
right now.
Okay. Guess not quite enough.
Thank you for calling the City Council meeting. We ask that you keep your comments to under 3 minutes. May I have your name and address, please? I'm sorry, you said Tom Zerbuin? I lost the call. Let's give him a moment and see if he calls back. City Clerk's office.
Yeah, I wanted to call in for the public comment session.
Okay. You said Tom Zerbuin and your address?
1747 Wicks Lane.
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, back on June 13th, that's 4 weeks ago today, the 7-day running total for average for new cases in the state of Montana for COVID-19 was 7. As of this morning's report, the 7-day average for new COVID cases in Montana is 47. That's nearly a 7-fold increase in 4 weeks. To do nothing and to stay where we are, we're falling in a hole. To say we're recovering is ridiculous. We're falling in a huge hole. Action is needed. Leadership is needed. Other cities have put resolutions and mandates for masks and limited occupations. This city can do the same. You can step up. 149 active cases in Yellowstone County. There is no way you're contact tracing them. It shows that on the report tonight. If you can't contact trace back.
Sounds like
It is still rapidly spreading. I urge you to do what is right, step up and become leaders for a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for calling the City Council meeting for this evening. We ask that you keep your comments to under 3 minutes. May I have your name and address, please?
My name is Lauren Wright, and my address is 511 Yellowstone Avenue.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank you guys so much for putting this on the docket and for keeping things like this at top of mind so that we're keeping our community safe. I just wanted to say that the Billings Community Foundation has been working with a group called the Mask Crusaders here in Billings. And so far, they have distributed over 5,000 masks to members of our medical community and our nonprofit community, especially those that are working in populations that might be more at risk for COVID. We've recently received a little bit of funding to start a community-wide awareness campaign for the Mask Crusaders, really focused on just normalizing mask wearing and what that means for our community, just to keep people safe, whether you're sick or not, hoping to take some of that stigma away from people who are choosing to wear masks or those that are required to wear masks for their job. So I just wanted to pop in and say, good job for what you're doing. Maybe there is a way that we can kind of connect some of these efforts moving forward.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.
I am not seeing any more calls.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the public comment. Public comment then is closed. Councilmember Trickey, before we move on to item number 2.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate at this point to ask staff to move towards being more proactive at wearing masks within the city offices and whatnot. And I think it would also be appropriate for us to ask staff to look into working with the business community to get some more messaging out there about the masks.
Chris Kukulski, our city administrator, I know has been working in those directions, so I'll turn it to Chris. Chris, should you comment?
Sure. I mean, I would agree. And after John and Steve's conversation last week, I think it continues to be a good message for us to lead by example and be more diligent. I know myself, something I can do a better job on. I think specifically, if you want us to play a role in advertising or spending dollars on communicating through our relationship with Q2. I mean, we have not pursued that avenue yet. I think the chamber and our partners with Big Sky Economic Development, they've gotten that word out there. We can partner with them. Ultimately, if the council would like us to move in a more aggressive way, in requiring masks. We haven't required them anywhere. We did contemplate it very seriously at the library, and the airport started down that route until the airlines kind of changed their perspective on it. So those have been, I think, our areas that have the most, the highest populations that come through daily, where we can continue to and maybe take a stronger stand in what our staff does, what I do in leading the organization.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I guess we can have a general discussion. I don't want to go beyond the scope of our agenda, which was an update. So I just caution us that we don't want to get out there too far without the public knowing what it is that we were going to be discussing tonight. But this is general enough. It seems that it's within the scope. So Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The issue that I have with the mask, and especially in an office area, is that if people are wearing masks all day long, they're breathing the same air. The droplets are contained, depending on the type of mask it is, they're contained within the mask. So it's a breeding ground for bacteria there. The other thing is that there are certain procedures, types of fabric, types of care that you have with wearing masks. I mean, I guess if everyone had disposable masks, that'd be fine. But I think people are more inclined, it's my understanding, to touch their face whenever they are wearing a mask, and which isn't good because it doesn't cover your eyes. You know, you go into just Costco where their employees, let alone the people, are required to wear masks. And I'm going to say, I bet 30% of them don't even have their face covered. They may have their mouth covered. So I just caution this mandatory type of going forward with this, because I think there's just so much more to wearing a mask than putting a mask on. I have masks. I know when to, you know, I put a mask on whenever I'm certain places. And, but to require that, and if you're not going to require certain care and types of wearing of those masks, I just find it, you know, kind of it's almost, the non-compliancy will be amazing.
Okay, thank you very much. So Chris, you're the employer, they're your employees. If you want to give us an update on your own internal policies at some point, please do, because you're right, we need to be leaders in this process. And then if there's money, you can find a way to go farther, maybe. Councilmember Brown?
I would just like to remind everybody, we've had, you know, our public health officer even tell us that it would be impossible to mandate masks for everybody. You know, we've taken their lead on everything else. I don't know why we would ignore this and try to mandate this. It's always been, you know, if you can't stay 6 feet, you should wear a mask. You know, I'm in absolute support of that. But requiring city staff to just wear masks because really just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know, unless they just can't stay within that 6 feet. I do have a question for Chris. What is our policy for Met Transit for people on the bus there? I mean, that is a pretty confined area there.
Yeah, my recollection is we haven't changed anything from what we were doing in phase 1 relative to our bus drivers. So I believe our drivers are wearing them. We've taken measures to try to keep them distance from customers. We continue to implement the phase 1 pieces. So what I'll do is I can touch base with Kevin tomorrow, see if anything has changed in that environment of late.
Okay. Okay. Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Trickey.
Thank you, Mayor. I tend to agree with Sean. I don't think it's something that we want to mandate. The health officer, I think if it came down to it, it got to be serious. I think he would have to come up with something, and they'd end up closing the businesses like they did before. I think this is really an issue that the businesses can kind of self-regulate. If they think it's an issue, they can do it. I know some businesses, you know, they monitor their employees daily. They make them wear masks at times. So I think this is really maybe again, this is something I think between the chamber, Big Sky EDA, and businesses that will take care of this, and that's really what they need to do. And it is true. I mean, like Tom said, the spikes are high, and if the businesses want to help maintain this, they'll help in and jump in and really help regulate how they're going to help control the spread within their community and keep the businesses open. So at this time, yeah, I'm not in support of doing a mandate.
Councilor Tricky.
I will point out that I did not say anything about mandating masks. And the one thing that John Felton did say that he wanted help doing is getting the word out there, especially to people in their 20s and 30s, that they should be wearing masks a lot more. And that was really the point that I was trying to say, is what can we do to help get that message out? The side comment I made about the city was really about modeling. I do believe that all of us should be modeling that. And I do believe that if you see city employees, you go to meetings with them, and you're in a room with them, then yeah, that definitely should be happening. But the main point that I really wanted to get across is I really think we should be looking at how we can help Big Sky, but the businesses get that message, help support the businesses. The real thing that I think is crucial in this is that if businesses start mandating it, they're going to get pushback from people, from their customers. And if we don't change the culture to say, hey, this is a very important issue, that's going to be a lot bigger issue for the businesses than if we are out there taking the lead saying, hey, everybody needs to be wearing a mask when they're out in public.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we would all agree. If we've got city employees who are in regular contact with the public and they can't maintain that 6-foot distance, they should be wearing masks. Hopefully that's already happening, but Chris, maybe you can check on that because we do need to be good examples as a city and as individuals. Anything else before we move to item number 2? Hopefully not. So I'm gonna conclude item number 1 and move us to item number 2. Billings Heights Business Association. Tonight we're fortunate to have 2 representatives from the Billings Heights Association, Ming Cabrera and Jennifer Owens. The Heights is more than 30,000 people, critical part of our city, but linked by one very busy street, but only one really, at that choke point. So has its own character, which we appreciate. With that, I don't know whether it's, Chris, do we have an agreement with how this should be proceeding, or should I just turn it over to Meg and Jennifer for their leadership?
I apologize. I'm not sure which of the 2 are going to start the discussion, but I know the clerk's office touched base with Ming, I believe, and it looks like Ming is the one who's going to kind of kick things off. So. Okay, great. Ming, it's all yours. Just ask that you introduce yourself to begin with.
Thank you, Mayor Cole and members of the council and the people that are on television tonight. Mayor, you pretty much summed up what I was going to talk about, but I'll do it again. I want to thank you for this opportunity to introduce you to the Billings Heights Business Association. We are a nonprofit 501c6 organization with the goal to foster business and community growth and development in the Billings Heights. As you know, the Billings Heights neighborhood is part of the incorporated city of Billings, representing about 35,000 of the city's 110,000 residents. There are more than 300 businesses in the Heights. Membership in the Billings Heights Business Association is open to all business owners doing business in the Heights or actively seeking to locate a business in the Heights. We also offer a non-voting affiliate membership to foster collaboration with members to align with our goals. Also, as Mayor noted, the heart of Billings Heights is Main Street, considered the busiest street of Montana, with 63,000 cars that use this street daily. With these major factors, the Billings Heights is a very vital part of Billings and could on its own have the population in the top 10 in the state of Montana. As I mentioned, my name is Ming Cabrera. I am the chair of the Billings Heights Business Association. Vice chair is Jennifer Owen, who will speak after my introduction using a PowerPoint. She's smarter than I am, by the way. Secretary Treasurer, Shelley Mann of Boot Hill Hotel, and included on the board of directors as advisors are Susan Hagen, Bull Mountain Grill, Derek Miller, Stockton Bank, and Dan Brooks, Chamber of Commerce. With this background, the need to promote Billings Heights with an organized group to help collaborate with the city for future growth for our community is vital. Our association was founded in the spring of 2019 and launched in September 2019. Some of our overview priorities, which Jennifer will include in her PowerPoint, are beautification of Main Street corridor, creation of economic tools, possibly BID or TIF district, recruitment and retention of businesses in the Heights, and member benefits such as education and networking efforts. We also actively engage with local state policymakers to ensure that Billings Heights priorities are reflected in the planning and development of transportation projects, recreational amenities, infrastructure, and other ways we can promote the development of Billings Heights. As stated above, we are a new entity, but are planning for the future growth of our community and hope the city of Billings will welcome us and believe we can work together to improve and foster improvements to the Magic City. We welcome the council and city officials to our quarterly meetings. Due to the COVID crisis, we have been meeting via Zoom, and the next meeting is scheduled for July 16th at 12 p.m. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Ming. We'll hand it over to Vice Chair Jennifer Owen.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Council members, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm going to go through very quickly a slideshow presentation, which you all should have received in your packets already. So, as Ming mentioned, the Billings Heights Business Association was founded last year, and it was founded finally due to some urgency around transportation projects, truly, that are developing in our community. Both the Inner Belt Loop and the Billings Bypass represent the opportunity to open up tremendous economic development in the Heights. Business owners in the Heights have been talking for many years about coming together and shaping the character and the nature of the Heights. And those two transportation projects that are moving forward really were the catalyst for this moment to come together and try to set forth as a business community a vision for Main Street and the adjacent economic development corridors so that we could see the Heights unfold as the family-friendly, economically vibrant community that we believe it can be in the Billings area. We also wanted to make sure that the business voice was being heard in the community discussions as we see some really exciting things taking place and some important urgent issues. The Heights has its own important, unique character, and we wanted to make sure that that was represented in the community conversations. So we did come together as business owners to form this organization with that focus really on promoting the general economic climate. We want to continue to see investment and growth in the Heights along Main Street and adjacent corridors. And we want to see that bring in a diversity of economic opportunities, job growth opportunities, and quality of life opportunities for the Heights residents. So we're in those initial stages of staking out what that vision might be to hopefully guide development conversations going forward. Ming went over our board of directors. We're fortunate to have had strong support from businesses in the Heights already, joining, asking questions, participating, and a number of members who've already signed up and put dollars on the line, even during these times of difficult economic crisis. So we really want to recognize and extend our appreciation for those business members who are standing up, being early leaders in our neighborhood. Like any economic development organization, we have both internal and external goals. We want to formalize this organization, make it something that lasts beyond this moment. We want to continue adding our members, but we really see a focus and a tremendous amount of push from our members around transportation projects. Not only the Inner Belt Loop and the Billings Beltway, which are really going to open up some development areas, but continuing to make Main Street that intentional place, that beautiful, welcoming, vibrant economic corridor, resolving some challenges that businesses faced around Airport Road and Main Street, the possible growth and evolution of Exposition Drive. These projects are really essential for our neighborhood, and we wanted to step up as an organized business entity and work together on those. And obviously, we've had to spend quite a bit of time on COVID-19 response and economic recovery. Shelley Mann does sit on the part of the Yellowstone County Economic Recovery Board. So we've been fortunate that we've been able to share real-time information with our members, direct them to resources, put together briefings, and try to help people get certainty around the challenges that we're facing right now. As many of you know, if you're a business owner, the thing you really need is certainty and clarity around the rules and the data and the information so that you can make business decisions. And we've been fortunate to be able to be that link for our Heights businesses. In the short amount of time that we have been operating, we have managed to achieve quite a few things. We have managed to resolve productively some transportation concerns in our community. We've been able to host those educational and networking briefings for our members and really begin to identify some priorities that we share in the community, some priority projects to work to grow and to see our community change in a economically vibrant direction. Over the long term, of course, we'll look to make that Heights business case. We want everyone from realtors to developers to investors to business owners to understand why they should be doing business in the Heights and why we think it's the place for people to put down roots, put down businesses, and begin bringing more of those quality of life amenities into the Heights neighborhood. We do see as an essential and ongoing priority the beautification and modernization of Main Street. Montana Department of Transportation will be doing some of that work, but on an ongoing basis, we want to have important conversations around traffic orientation, traffic calming, the visual aesthetic, creating that strategic placemaking that makes Main Street seem like a part of our community and not just something you speed down on your way to somewhere else. And we will be focusing on evaluating the economic development tools that make sense for our neighborhood. That might be a bid, it might be a TIF district. We're not sure at this time. But we do want to have that basket of economic development tools that helps us attract businesses to the Heights, helps them see the reasons that they should be investing in our neighborhood and our community. As Ming said, we welcome the council to be participants in our projects and in our growth and our conversations. You can find us on Facebook, you can email us. We'd love to have your input, and we'd love to continue to show you the commitment of the Heights business community to growing and evolving our neighborhood. We know there are important priorities and important decisions before the council, and we're excited about the opportunity to be organized and join with you in working on those priorities. So with that, I will end the presentation, and both Ming and I are happy to answer any questions that council members might have.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Ming. The city, the council, I'm sure look forward to working with the Heights Business Association and all of the businesses in the Heights and the board going forward. It's exciting. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm sure we can be good teammates in helping to accomplish those. With that, we'll open up for questions. Councilmember Purinton.
Thanks, Ming and Jennifer. It's so good to have you both here and sharing your vision for the Heights. It's a long time coming. That's all I can say. So how many members do you have right now? Of what you said, you have 300 businesses, and I would imagine most of those businesses are small business owners, local businesses.
Right. And right now, Pam, because of the COVID, it really put a damper on us getting more members as it is. So we're on a membership drive, but right now we're at about a dozen at this point. So we're just starting. We actually just incorporated in January. So the entity itself, we're getting there, and I'm begging like crazy, and we're trying to get people to see the value of this. Most people see it. So it's going to come. We'll be here for a while. I'm not going anywhere. And so we're going to keep pushing, and we have great council people like Councilman Roy Neese, Kendra Shaw, and Frank Ewald. And Yaka has helped us a lot too, to make sure that we keep doing what we need to keep moving the Billings Heights. Like you said, it's been a long time coming, and we want to continue there. So thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Ming. Can you just tell us what your dues structure is for business members and for non-Heights businesses?
Thank you very much. Our dues are $200 a year, okay, for the membership, and then $100, and you get a non-voting membership. And those are for people that just want to be affiliated and have some ideas of what we need to be done at that point. So I'll take a check from you, Mayor Coyle, anytime you want.
Okay, very good. Will do. Thank you. Other questions for Ming or Jennifer? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to thank Ming for really putting this thing together. I remember when he was starting that, we were starting to meet, and so he did a really, really good job of putting this together. And then Jennifer got on board, and both between the two of them, they've really helped develop this organization. I think, like Ming says, this is going to be a nice long-term thing. The Heights has been wanting something like this for quite some time, and these two have gotten together to help organize that. So I look forward to seeing that membership grow and seeing you come more and more to the council members to help represent the Heights businesses. So thank you very much for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Roy.
Very good. Other questions or comments for our presenters today? Councilmember Brown.
I'd like to echo what everybody else is saying for sure. A lot of exciting things going on there with the bypass and all of that. If you can calm that traffic a bit on Main, provide more access, I think there's some really exciting opportunities there. But I do have a question. Have you guys been working with some of the other organizations that are pretty well established, such as the downtown and some of those guys, just for maybe some hand-holding on your way through a lot of this? I really look forward to seeing a lot more of you guys. I really do.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, you don't have to ask me twice to come talk to council. I love the opportunity to come share with you what's going on in the Heights. So obviously we see the chamber has come on as an ex officio member of our board of directors. They have been involved from the start in helping us to get organized and have been very supportive, making it clear to their members that this is not a competitor organization or a detractor organization, but rather a partner for economic development in our community. The same has been true with Big Sky Economic Development. They have been an excellent corridor for information. They have attended meetings, they've presented, they've reached out to us for input behind the scenes. So we've really had great input from them. I think Ming has had conversations with the DBA a couple of times about some opportunities on how we structure member benefits and those sorts of kind of internal operation things. So we've really been pleased at the support that we've received from other business entities in helping us get this organization up off the ground.
Thank you very much. Chris Kukulski.
Just curious if the group is thinking at all about a formal business improvement district or any of structures that the city should be just conscientious of leading into the future. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the challenge that we have with all of those is, yes, we want to look and evaluate at all of them. There is a significant amount of planning studies that have to be done at the outset, and those things cost money. So part of our membership drive urgency right now is to get that capital in place. We've had some great conversations with the Montana Department of Commerce in partnership with Big Sky EDA about accessing sources of funds that we could use for planning. We've been very conscientious in both the Business Association and the Heights Task Force not to overlap and to sort of make sure that we understand what the task force will work on and what the Business Association will work on. But obviously there's conversations about that you all are having on council and that we're having about neighborhood planning and what a master vision for the Heights might look like. So Chris, if there's the opportunity for us to come together in sort of a public-private way and blend some funds on, updating neighborhood plans like Councilmember Chiriki has championed and working for that Main Street economic development, if we could bring all that together in one unified effort, I think we would be thrilled to have that conversation.
Thank you. Anything else before we open up for public comment on item number 2? Seeing none, then this is the time for anybody who's listening to call in. If they'd like to offer public comment, that number again, 237-6196, 237-6196. As I mentioned earlier, our meeting is ahead of what you are hearing. So please mute whatever or turn off whatever you're listening to so it's not so confusing. We'll need your name and address and you'll have 3 minutes to comment. 237-6196. 237-6196. Our clerk, Tony Keener, do we have any calls?
I have not received any calls.
Okay. Thank you very much then. Not hearing any the phone ring, we will close our public comment period on item number 2. If there's no other council discussion on this item, I would suggest at 7:24 we take a brief break, come back maybe as early as 7:30, conclude our third item, public safety mill levy discussion, and then move on to public comment, non-agenda items, and then our executive session. So with that, we will adjourn for a brief break, try to come back as close to 7:30 as possible. Thank you.
Tony, can you set me up for potentially sharing my screen? Yes, it is. And Brent and Gina Dahl are both available to answer questions. Really, the goal here is very simple. I want to make sure all 11 council members understand as reasonably as possible kind of what the rules are relative to communication regarding the public safety levy or the repeal and replace charter amendment for this September 15th. And basically, I'll just highlight it. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read it. For the public who may be watching, we really have overarching clarity in state law that public money, and time is also money, public money cannot be spent to advocate for or against individuals running for public office or ballot issues. And so it's fairly clear when it comes to full-time city employees that we cannot advocate for or against. Where things can be perceived as gray on the staff side is that we are permitted by law. And as the materials show, there's been some attorney generals have weighed in on answering questions on this question over the years. As your staff, as public servants, we can, in fact, are perfectly reasonable that we educate the community on the impacts of decisions. So we cannot, what I've said over my 20 years in Montana, 21 years, is right at the beginning of presentations, I commonly will say, we're here to educate, not advocate. And we'll say that again when we wrap it up. And so on the staff side, that's very important. On the elected official side, I think it's fairly black and white as well. The council should avoid being proponents or opponents in a similar capacity during official city meetings. So city council meetings, parks board, any board that's having a meeting conducted doing business officially for the city, whether it's a recommendation to you or this city council meeting, you should avoid, you're advised to avoid advocating for or against. Outside of official meetings, you can advocate or oppose all day long. That is not restricted. And as you saw there from the opinion from your city attorneys, as well as the attorney general's feedback, even down to more complicated issues that the county commonly runs more into as a sheriff and other full-time elected official positions are, there's language there. So my goal in this conversation is for you guys as clearly as possible to understand what you can and cannot do, what you should expect out of myself, the chiefs, and the staff as we educate. And then a third component that is relatively new, I say relatively new since 2016, sometime post 2016, I don't know exactly when, the Office of Political Practices here in Montana has changed its position relative to reporting. So now, as a staff, and you see from the memo, we've already submitted our report as a city, as an organization, to tell the Office of Political Practices this issue's on the ballot. We will be monthly filling out reports, all of us as staff. If I've already logged some time, a few hours here and there, as I'm working on the PowerPoint presentation, as we're reaching out to media outlets, as we start to give presentations, all that time will be tracked, whether it's the chief, myself, anybody on that education team, the number of copies maybe we've made, any dollars we spend there, those will be supplied to the Office of Political Practices monthly in that state required report. And yeah, I think that really is my summary. As I said, both Brent Brooks, Gina Dahl, and I are all available to answer questions. And the goal here is for you to walk away from this conversation with clarity as to what you can or cannot do ultimately in communicating with our public as they head to the polls September 15th.
Okay, Chris, if that's it, we will open it up for questions. I'm sure there will be plenty. One, I saw Councilmember Brown's hand first. Chris, just give some thought, come back to what your plan is on the education side with staff, and we'll ask you that a little bit later. But Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, would that include us advocating at the community meetings that you'll be holding and or at the task force meetings?
So one clear delineation there is task forces are not formal representatives of the city. So the task force meeting is not considered like a planning board meeting or a city council meeting. And so you can speak, your free speech rights are not limited in a capacity. One of the gray areas that I think Brent has done a good job trying to help us understand as staff, and it's important for you too, is though there's some grayness where we want to make it as bright as we can, is if we're giving a staff presentation on education, we shouldn't mix that with a council presentation on advocacy. So when we're making a presentation for education, we'd like the cleanest, keep it an education presentation. If any of you or the public choose to make statements outside of those presentations, I just think it's really important we separate what is the presentation and our information from anything you may comment on. In fact, the cleanest way to do that is to keep them separate. For instance, if we're presenting at Rotary, the cleanest thing probably to do there is not to make comments after the Rotary presentation that the chiefs and I give, but to maybe get on a different Rotary agenda a week later or weeks later and say, hey, can we have 2 minutes of your time? We don't need to give a presentation per se, but we'd like to, give some information to the board. Or to the membership.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyette and Shaw.
So Chris, could any one of the council people, members, do an ad in the paper, do an ad on a radio? That's permissible?
As long as you are not using city resources to create it, pay for it, do it, absolutely. You are not limited in that capacity. The key is here, just as this example, tonight we shouldn't spend 5 minutes or 50 minutes or any length of time talking about how that might function or work with some committee who might do that type of thing. To answer the legal question, can you as elected officials participate in that process? The answer is yes, you absolutely can. But we cannot use public resources to help create it, advertise it, etc.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Chris, I asked this at our weekly meeting, but I wanted a ruling from Brent in terms of public spaces. This does not include parks and other city property that beyond the actual city buildings. Is that correct? We're talking about City Hall, things like that.
General Counsel, you're right, and certainly Gina has worked on this along with me and has actually taken the lead the last month or so. But I would certainly think that meeting and advocating in a public park on your own time, not using public money, equipment, like a PA system, etc., would be appropriate. And certainly, Gina, if you would like to comment, that's fine too.
Yeah, I think the key is simply to consider whether you're using public time, facilities, equipment, supplies, personnel, or city funds to solicit that support or to solicit opposition to the ballot issue. Certainly, city parks are fundamentally public forums. So if you are simply at a public park discussing these issues, I can't see how that would, I mean, and you're on your own and you're not doing some sort of city business and you're not acting as council member, you know, providing some sort of city business, then I can't see how that would be an issue if you're advocating in a city park, a public forum that any individual citizen can exercise their rights of free speech.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Purinton.
Thank you. So Chris, let's go back to the Rotary Club. You and the chief are there educating the Rotarians. There are a couple of council members there. So it would not be unusual for, at the end of your presentation, for someone to ask publicly, one or both of the council members, what are your thoughts on that? Are you think that this is a good thing? I mean, obviously we think it's a good thing or we wouldn't be doing it. But, you know, to have a little bit better explanation from a council member as to how did you get to this point or whatever it is that they're going to be advocating at that point, I would say. So I suppose that's okay.
Here's what I was saying. I've got both Gina and Glenn to help, and I hope we don't get too muddy here. Here's what I would tell you. That was an extremely common practice in the past. And to tell you you can't answer the question or go through your thought process or say, I think it's awfully hard to draw a line there and say you can't do it. Unfortunately, of late, Bozeman had spent a fair amount of time spending time and resources defending what it had done, and nothing was found to be problematic with what they had done, but they had to spend tens of thousands of dollars defending their position, and ultimately they lost a whole construction season on a law and justice centers the voters approved. So that cost the taxpayers probably 6 figures easily. What we've talked about as a staff is the cleaner we can make that break, the easier it is to defend that we're not mixing and matching the advocacy and the education. So we're not going to have, unless we're just focused on it, if any of you are asked to participate in the presentation, we need to stay far and clear away from advocacy of any type. And still the cleanest is to not go there relative to the presentations that are focused on education. But to say that you can't answer those questions or have any comments to give the feedback that went into your thought process to vote 11-0 to put it on the ballot is part of that gray area there, that if someone wants to, they've been making a habit of making this a little harder. And it isn't just Bozeman that ran into this. Flag Valley Community College had a problem several years ago, and others have, as unfortunately folks have been watching with a finer tooth comb, magnifying glass as to what are we doing and how you define that public resources definition on education versus advocacy. Sorry, Brent, Chris, anything you would want to add to that?
Yarn Council, no, I think Chris stated it very well. One option, Councilwoman Purinton, is to simply say, hey, we're more than happy to talk to you away from this educational presentation, and we would like to have a separate time for the Rotary Club in the next week or two to speak to you separate and apart from the educational presentation today, something like that. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. Gina, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, certainly the statutes are not intended to curtail your free speech rights, but We simply want to make sure that it's very clear that the city educational efforts are not coordinating with any advocacy efforts, because that would put us in that difficult position. So.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's also, I think previously we discussed that we should not be sending emails through our city council emails discussing or advocating or mixing. So I think it was stated previously that we should be only using our own private emails. Is that correct? Thank you.
Your Honor and Council, yes, I think that's a very good black and white division or firewall, if you will. I think that would be a very important thing to consider.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. So this might be a Gina or Brent question, or it might be a Chris question. So in regard to the advocacy, so my way of advocating is by educating. And is it violation if we use the slides that have been created by Andy? If those slides were created by a city staff member, are city council members allowed to use that material that's been provided to us and that's been on public, it's been presented in a public manner, but are we allowed to use that when we go out and advocate? My advocacy is education. But that might be considered advocacy because I'm an elected official. Am I in violation if I'm using the slides and the content and information provided by Andy? Thank you.
Dina, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, I'll take that. Absolutely not. You are not in violation. You can use any information that we're using to educate is out there in the public forum, so that's free reign for anybody to use. We don't regulate how the information that we put out there into the public is used.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris, did you want to add to that?
I just think that's a good opening to maybe talk about a couple of tools that we'll use. So one of the things we're working on, and I could pull it up for you, but frankly, none of the slides they're being updated, but they're similar to what you've seen in the past relative to, we'll create a slide deck for PowerPoint presentations. That'll be a base. And then we'll create a handout. So folks can walk away with something, and it'll be critical. Those things will be education focused. The highlights. When is this election? What is its impact fiscally? What has been some of the challenges we're facing, of which we highlight crime rates, fire calls, and our structural financial imbalance. We really try to focus it, frankly, in those three areas: law enforcement, fire, and finance, and are very deliberately trying to keep it to that. The fourth point, I guess we make, at least in this draft, beginning and ending, is this is the 2020 question. There's going to be a 2021 question. This is the base. This is the foundation that we're trying to get firmed up. This is not implementing the strategies to full on, make our community safer. This is shoring up the base of our budget for that. So.
Chris, while we have you, some of these efforts may cost the city money. School District 2, which has similar statutory restrictions on it, I believe, has spent, I don't know how much, but real money. It's hired a professional, talented marketing firm to help get the message out, the educational message out on the school district levy. What is the funding source if the city needs to spend that money, and are you prepared to spend that? And would you like any feedback from the council on that? Or is that just something that is within your regular spending authority within your own department and you don't need us to weigh in on that?
Well, so here's how I would separate them, Mayor. So if we were in pre-COVID-19, we would have both budgeted, I think, maybe upwards of $10,000-$15,000 for that campaign. In working with both the school district here locally as well as in my past, in these smaller levies, what I anticipate is us spending a few $1,000s. When I say few, I mean less than 10, maybe even closer to 5, relative to making sure we got a good, clean message and that we're getting it out there. But it's all on the education front. Those larger campaigns, the last significant school levy prior to my time here, is like the library levy. That might be the closest city one when the library was done here in Billings. That is where you had, as I understand it, tens of thousands of dollars raised outside of the city by an advocacy group that was promoting the issue. And they're really two very significant things. So to answer your question, I do expect to spend a few $1,000s making sure the message is clear and clean and straightforward, that we are able to get it out in both media form, all media forms. But we will not spend tens of thousands of dollars paying for ads. We don't have that capacity in our budget. We're going to need to rely on social media. We're going to need to rely on inexpensive ways to make communication efforts. And if there's an advocacy group that is created outside, it will need to deal with any of the advocacy investments.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Boyette.
I'll just say this, in the old days, going back, they used to have blue ribbon committees of some of the local city fathers. Would we consider that, or has that been considered at all? A group to get together and communicate to the community what their thoughts are?
I'll chime in there, and other council members and Chris as well. Absolutely, and we still want that support. If they become an advocacy group, again, it'd be dangerous for us to spend too much time here now. The chambers, I'm still hoping will get on board. I've spoken with some were less interested because of COVID-19. And so there are some challenges. I know I've met with some marketing firms, either for the city or to play in that role. So absolutely, but our time is short and resources are limited. Councilmember Ronnie, you had your hand out.
Thank you. I was just going to respond to that too. Yes, we had started to organize one with the previous council that had all been discussed. And then council just couldn't make a decision on where we were going with a public safety mill levy. And so it was really hard to communicate to any leader where we were going and if we even had votes for a public safety mill levy. So it got pushed and pushed and pushed back because it was a challenge to have decisions made. And then COVID hit. And so those that we had been talking with originally, they're not on board right now. So it was a challenge. Yeah, it was a challenge. But I think those are things that we can talk about in our private emails as a group.
Other questions for Chris or Gina or Brent or comments? Councilmember Brown and then Councilmember Neese.
Chris, this might be off topic a little bit, but you're talking about budget. Do you guys have kind of a idea of what groups you're going to try to meet with? Is it like just the task force, or are you talking to all of these other groups that are out there?
You know, unfortunately, with the virtual nature relative to COVID-19, actually, let me answer the question as if we weren't in COVID-19. I would say this: we'll meet with any group, anywhere, anytime, no matter how big or small, to educate them. That stays true today. We just have to do it differently. So if they've got the capability, if they're small enough or have big enough spaces, we'll gladly come to their place and give them the presentation and answer their questions. If they don't have that and we can do it virtually, we'll be working all of that. In any of your help, all the traditional things will hit, where there's groups, where they exist, service clubs, task forces, the chamber, other boards, the hospitals, our city employees. Tomorrow morning, I'll be meeting with a follow-up budget discussion with our parks employees, and I will be presenting this to them. We will be presenting it to our police and firefighters. We got nearly 1,000 people. They need to understand what this is. So we'll do that. And anybody you would suggest to us, please let us know. Let Wynette know. Email myself and Wynette, because she's coordinating those presentations and those discussions. And then we're going to try to be using social media in a way that we haven't in the past. It's inexpensive and it's got a pretty strong following.
Councilmember, I'm sorry, go ahead, Councilmember Brown.
Just one follow-up. So Chris, would the city's Zoom account and stuff be used for that, or would these groups need to supply some way to facilitate that, or would the city facilitate that?
So as far as on the education front, we can certainly use our Zoom to set up and communicate that way.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I think I failed to mention, where I don't know if it's been scheduled yet, it's on the list to be scheduled, which is the editorial board. We want the Gazette, we want any media sources to understand the background in this, to communicate.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Gina and Brent, this is a question to you. Thank you for answering Denise's question about the email. We can't use our email, city email. What about intangibles like the city logo on our business card, or just our signing our name that we're Ward 2, City Council? What impact is that utilizing the city when we're advocating?
Gina, you want to tackle that?
Sure. The city logo is much like what we talked about with Councilmember Ronning with regard to public information. We don't regulate the use of our logo as far as I'm aware. So that would be fine. You can use, when you're signing your name, you can use your title. Again, that comes along with you and your position. It's not, that's not considered use of public time or public facilities or supplies or personnel or resources. So that kind of thing is okay.
And I might just add, Your Honor and Council and Councilmember Neese, that is essentially what the 2005 Attorney General opinion from then Attorney General Mike McGrath says as well.
Yeah, quick follow-up question on that.
Sure.
Regarding the resources, so if we're meeting with a group that happens to be meeting in the public library, are you indicating that we then cannot advocate that group if they've invited us to come speak to them?
I don't think that that's the case. I think the library is much like a city park in that respect, that people often use the city library for public meetings and as a public forum to discuss all kinds of things.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
Did Chris want to say something?
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris.
Sorry, I just want to add, if you take a peek at that Attorney General opinion, I think one of the areas that was helpful to me in there is think about, it specifically talks about a sheriff or deputy wearing a uniform, and that's allowed. So when it comes to you guys using business cards, your title, you don't have to erase yourself from the city. And even in that case said, no, Sheriff, you can keep your uniform on while you're communicating in an advocacy capacity. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw.
This is very quick, but I just, on the topic of social media, wanted to say I'm far from an expert in social media, but if any council members would like a social media tutorial on how to start doing some of this engagement virtually on some of these platforms that maybe you're not totally familiar with, I would just like to offer myself as a resource. I would be very happy to help. I've done some Facebook Live videos and other things that have had great positive responses and have seemed to reach quite a few people. And I feel like I'm just getting encouragement to have more of you do it. So I'm like, please, if you would like to, or if you're feeling intimidated, please reach out to me and I would be happy to help with that, since we don't really have time to do the Blue Ribbon Commission, but we could do a social media commission.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw, what is your hourly rate?
Well, I'm on salary with the city, you know, so I get the big bucks.
Okay, well, we'll pay you what the city pays. How about that? But thank you for your offer. That's very generous and much appreciated. I'm sure we'll take you up on it. Chris Kukulski.
I apologize. We didn't talk about this, Gina.
Chris, you froze.
Brent, but I think it's really important we touch on emails. That doesn't open the door to having a conversation with more than a majority of the council. So I think you need to be careful there that you don't end up having an electronic meeting because you're communicating with each other with private emails. That doesn't work. I think it's a good firewall to the separation of the advocacy versus education, but always, always, always keep in mind public meeting laws.
As long as you're talking about city business,
Yeah.
I guess I agree that that's an important consideration. We need to think through that. I'm not sure that private citizens who want to get together to advocate for this are necessarily conducting city business. So to be continued, but I just wouldn't want to concede that is those advocacy efforts are something that we are doing in our capacity as city council people, as opposed to just individuals. And we still have our First Amendment public free speech rights. That's my opinion on that one, but we can come back to that one. But it's important to be aware of that one. Absolutely. Other questions for Chris? Chris, you stressed rightfully so the importance of staff not using staff time, staff resources, city resources, but staff also have First Amendment free speech rights outside their work. And so I think we want to make it very clear that if staff, and we have 1,000 city employees, want to get involved with advocacy, they're not running afoul of doing so as long as they're doing it off hours. And not using city resources, correct? And can we just clarify that? And then also, there is, of course, the definitional problem. We expect Chris Kukulski, for example, to work, and Brent Brooks and Gina Dahl to work 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So it's hard to define the line, but can you comment on staff working off hours?
So you are correct, Mayor. As public servants, as public employees, we don't give up our free speech rights, but the cleaner we can keep it, the better. And in fact, in some of these cases, that is one of the complaints. Even the city manager or city administrator meeting with staff and going over this with them is somehow been twisted into, well, wink, wink, you know what my expectation is. Well, no. Our expectation is that our employees understand the implications from an education standpoint, and who they choose to share that information with is up to them, and how they answer questions or maybe share in conversations during their personal time, not using city equipment and resources. They don't give those up. They don't give those free speech rights up just because they choose to work for the citizens of Billings.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. And just to clarify, I guess more for the public than anyone else, and just to put it out there again, that both the firefighters union and the police union, they are allowed to advocate, and they are allowed to work for the public safety mill levy. If I understand that correctly, the unions can do that, and as long as the firefighters themselves and the police officers themselves are doing it on their own time through the union efforts, they're allowed to do that. Correct?
That is correct, and you mentioned the key pieces there. They too cannot use public resources to do it. Their dues and their union dollars are not public resource. They are theirs. So they too, though, need to be careful about the time and money side. And as long as they stay away from and keep that nice clear line there, then they're free to advocate and communicate their opinions about taking positions.
And Your Honor and Counsel, that is specifically provided for in the Montana Code 2-2-121 3C. I realize that section number probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but that in essence says that a public official or a public employee is not restricted from expressing their personal political beliefs, again, so long as public time, resources, money, equipment, etc., are not utilized for the staff.
Thank you. Other questions or discussion before we open up for public comment? If anybody is listening, we are about to open to public comment. That phone number 237-6196. Don't call yet, but be prepared. Councilmember Purington.
So Chris, when are we starting this? When are you starting this? I think you said you've already started meeting a little bit, and
so our call to presentations and out to groups is happening. It started late last week. So, and in fact, I think our chiefs have already given a couple, at least one or two presentations. So we've known this is coming, and we will really ramp things up here in the upcoming weeks as some dates to keep in mind. We all know Election Day, September 15th, is when ballots are due, all mail ballot. You'll receive those at the end of August. And so really there, at least by the data, you'll have a group of hopefully a significant group that chooses to fill that ballot out right away, the first days of September, and send it in. And then there tends to be a little bit of a lull, and then there's a rush towards the end there. So bottom line is a lot of people will be making their decision by September 1st. And we need to have that information in their hands by September 1st.
the follow-up, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, Councilmember Purington.
So Chris, you said that you've updated some of those slide presentations from what we've had. Will we have those available to us?
Yes, and it hasn't been updated yet. Just today, we got the new data from the police department, fire department, and so that's happening this week. I would anticipate us kind of wrapping that up, and yes, we'll share that with you guys. Tomorrow's focus goes from the PowerPoint to what's the handout, and you guys will have copies of those as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. And that just kind of triggered something. And it's okay, just to clarify, to make sure all council members know and city staff know too, it's okay for us to use our city staff email or call a city staff person to ask for information. Like, for example, if I were to ask for information on, are there updated numbers that compares how the different cities in Montana are delegated inmates when they're released from correctional facilities and where they go. Like Billings gets a disproportionate number from all of the other cities. Can we get that updated information? So that's okay to ask that, correct?
There's no change in your access to information before this ballot measure or after this ballot measure. So please keep in mind to keep Kevin and I in the loop on those, and we try to make sure that we're aware, and also try to keep an eye on that we're managing kind of time and staying away from the advocacy piece and making sure we're staying on the education.
That was the actual question I was asking, so thank you.
Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Honored Council. Appreciate the handout you gave us, or the email about a lot of what we can or cannot do. So thank you for that. I have one request. Already you probably are doing it, but if we could have meetings in every ward and one in the library, and set that up as soon as possible. We've done it before, like at the Banks or Castle Rock School. And I maybe you said that already, but I didn't hear it. But I'd really appreciate that being done as soon as possible. And then that also gives the ward people a chance also to advocate for people to come to that meeting. So really hope we could do that as soon as possible. Thank you.
Good suggestion. Thank you very much. Anything else before public comment? If not, members of the public, we'll open up for public comment. That phone number 237-6196, 237-6196, as you've heard before. What you're hearing is behind the actual meeting. So please turn off your television or your computer when you call. That number again, 237-6196. We're almost a minute ahead of what you hear, so we will delay slightly to give you a chance to call in. When you do call, you'll have 3 minutes. We'll ask you for your name and your address, and you'll be put in a phone queue if there's more than one caller. And just listen, and the clerk will talk to you on the phone and give you your opportunity. 237-6196. Tony, do we have any calls?
I have not received any calls.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be very slow in picking up my gavel to close out public comment period. Not hearing any phone calls coming in, so we will close public comment period. Thank you very much, council members. Brings us then to item council discussion before public comment on non-agenda items. Do we have any items of council discussion? Councilmember Joy, and then Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just kind of have had a feeling like as a policy setting board and as a legislative local governing body, I think in certain ways when we have tackled some issues as council, we could have benefited from having committees of council members working through some of those issues before they get handed off to staff. Sometimes it feels like a little bit of a ping pong. Things are brought to council. Council has a discussion. There's a lot of different ideas that are gone through, and then they're back on staff, and then they ping back and forth between us. And I think, you know, committees are really a part of the legislative process. And I think that we could benefit from forming committees when it comes to some of our important issues. You know, looking at initiatives usually are brought by one council member forward to go to staff. Staff works on them. They ping back to us, then we pong it back to staff. And I think there are some really important pieces of work that council should actually get into and really start to debate and think about and look at policy before it gets pinged over to the staff. So I just have had the feeling like we as council members, we're responsible for our legislative function. We're responsible for our policy decisions and direction. We need to dig in a little bit deeper as members of council before it gets to staff. So I really feel like when certain things come up, I think I'll be advocating for forming committees. I think that it gives us an opportunity as council members to figure out what are our policy directions, to really dig into details of what it is that we would like staff to actually accomplish for us. And so I think moving forward, I will be an advocate for stronger and forming more committees for council to actually dig into issues and figure out before they're put towards staff. Thank you.
Thank you for that perspective and that idea. Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Hunter. I did just quickly want to be redundant on Mr. Mumford. I'd call him a legacy of innovation. And really, I've got to know him over 7 years. And from the landfill to water treatment plant, all these tours that I've honored to take, not only him as a person, but also as a great leader. Jennifer Duray and Debbie Melling are exemplary mentored under him. And just, it will be, I don't see it as a loss. I'm sure we'll gain new people, but truly, as some of you shared, a lot of the city does not know how great and how hardworking and how innovative Mr. Mumford was. And so I take my hat off to him and wish him good sailing and good fishing, and really our deepest gratitude for his service and what he brought to our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Yakovich, for those kind and accurate words. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. So I wanted to bring up for council discussion the idea of the big national campaigns that come to Billings to visit us and what that ends up costing us in terms of public safety, and also to put this on your radar, Chris, from the staff perspective of that is something that I'm going to want to know every time we have somebody come, but also just to kind of have the discussion of, do we have an appetite for doing something like trying to ask for a public safety deposit or something before a big campaign comes? I don't think to discourage them, but just to say, I mean, Billings' budget is underwater still. So I think taking a lot of hits like that could be really kind of catastrophic to the public safety budget in my mind. So I would like us to be careful of that, and also just to see if anybody wanted to respond or agreed, had other ideas. Thanks.
Chris can comment. I have sent staff a pretty detailed outline of a possible policy that I would support. It is, in my opinion, an honor to host any national campaign, and we should expect to play a major role on our nickel to do that, but there are limits. And so that would be my suggestion, is that we ask to split it with them, and maybe have make that request in advance so they know before they're coming. If you just ask after the fact, then of course you're not going to get anywhere, and see what that happen or what happens with that. But I know we've started that discussion. I've also started that discussion with mayors in the other 7 largest cities in Montana on the thought that we might want to do something cooperatively. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're visiting with the other mayors on that. I believe that, I mean, this has come up several times, and these things, you're right, these get expensive. But I think where we were at is I don't think we can refuse to offer that security. As far as, I believe that's what I was told in the past, is when they come, we're obligated whether we want to or not. So maybe Brent can offer more on that.
Brent, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, Your Council, we can certainly double check, but I think Councilmember Brown is correct. But I tell you what, Gina and I will circle back with Chief St. John and double check and email you, all of you, obviously. But I think that's a great question. But that is my understanding, but we'll confirm that.
It'd be great if we could get that policy in place.
You know what?
Okay. I'm sorry, Chris Kukulski and Roy, Councilmember Neese, you've all had your hands up.
What we've understood from both our own experience as well as cities around the country is we've not got any good examples of successful methods of charging. Whether you charge it up front, whether you try to charge it up front, or you try to collect it afterwards. What as a staff we've thought would be maybe a hybrid that would be more successful is two main components to it. What services are we willing to provide? And we say, here's where our service ability begins and ends. We have had some experience in Billings, and we had it last year, where we did kind of draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we can provide, and we can't go further than this. And so if you want to go further than that, then you need to find other ways, and or if there's an emergency, then obviously we will be in a position to respond to your emergency like any other emergency in town. So as our staff, that's what our discussion has been in part around. The other component the mayor brought up is it would be helpful if all of our larger cities in Montana were similarly poised in this, because one or multiples of us are going to be getting asked, or not asked, told, we're coming to town. And so that coordination with the other 6 communities of a similar response, I think would be helpful. And that's part of the conversation that's going on so far. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I saw a lot of other hands. Councilmembers Neese, Purington, and Ronning, I believe. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Kendra, thanks for bringing this up. I think you're right. This is something that has been addressed before, like Sean said, and we do need to do something about it. Mayor, I appreciate you coming up with something on this. I recall the police, Chief St. John saying that sure, he could refuse the service, or saying here, we have our police force in normal standards, but he said they would bring in the National Guard or something like that instead. And it's like, well, that's fine. And bring in the National Guard. I mean, if you want protection, bring it in. Otherwise, you can pay for us for our service. I don't think we should offer any service unless they pay for it. We have a normal police and fire service. If they want extra, they pay for it. If they want to bring in the National Guard, let them bring them in. I have no problem with them. And if they're not going to pay us for our service, then we shouldn't offer it.
Okay, council members Purington and Ronning.
Well, I'll echo that. I think that there should be a lot coming from the campaigns because they have a lot of money. But without stifling that conversation, I want to go back to what Denise said first thing regarding the committees, because I've been talking to former council members, and I think it's relatively new that the staff would set the agenda, the city administrator would set the agenda. I think that and I think I mentioned it before early on, that on Tuesdays, there would be, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 council members. They would go through things that were presented from the city administrator, things that they need to look at, things that the city council wanted to address, and to what depth they wanted to address. And they would actually go through the consent agenda before the council meeting. So whenever we've talked in the past about the consent agenda should be just, yep, it's that rubber stamp sort of thing, but really hasn't been rubber stamped. But it's that the council members have already addressed some of those issues, asked those questions that we continually ask at consent agenda time during council meetings. So it may be a little bit smoother in that respect. I don't know who would want to spend another hour or 2 hours on a Tuesday doing this, but I guess if it meant you don't have to spend another hour or 2 on Monday nights, it might be a means of looking into it. And I think I don't know if it was in Bozeman's or Missoula's, they do that as well now, where they have where the council sets that agenda. And their agenda setting meeting, it's like an hour on Tuesday. It's not even that long. So just something to consider. Denise, I agree with you. I think the councils, if we could work together on some of these issues beforehand, because it does kind of ping pong back. And I think Chris has been kind of the victim of that at sometimes, and trying to get some direction from staff. So I wouldn't mind to pursue something like that, but it would definitely have to be something that the council will agree to do. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I'm in complete agreement with Roy and about what he said, and this has been discussed. It was discussed at length in the previous council as well. So one of the things, I guess this would be a question for either Brent or Gina. It kind of is a little bit mind-boggling to me that we spent, I don't know what, over an hour discussing about what the Commissioner of Political Practices will allow us to do in regard to the public safety of our own citizens here in Billings. That it seems really odd to me that it would be allowable for the city to use resources to pay for a national campaign to come advocate for a candidate, that doesn't even live in our own community, that we're going to give thousands and thousands of dollars to a candidate that doesn't even live here, and yet we can't even spend a dime on the public safety of our own citizens advocating for that. To me, that seems like a conversation with the Commissioner of Political Practices, that the Commissioner of Political Practices needs to get involved with the local, if they're running a federal campaign or a national campaign of some kind, and it's a big political party, those political parties need to be held accountable to the same standards that we have to apply to our own local citizens here. I mean, I will really advocate for that, because that seems really crazy to me. So my 2 cents on that. And totally in 100% agreement with Roy. And if we have to bring that as an initiative, consider it a committee set.
I think we would all agree that point is worth at least 3 cents. It is a strange irony, isn't it? Okay, is that, I think, concludes then our council discussion. We'll open it up for public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the public, 237-6196. Call quickly if you would like to comment on anything that was not on our agenda tonight. 237-6196. At the conclusion of this period, we will adjourn the public portion of the meeting and reconvene in executive session for pending litigation. 237-6196. This is the time for public comment on non-agenda items. Please turn off your television or your computer because our meeting is ahead of what you're hearing. 237-6196. Tony, do we have any callers for public comment on non-agenda items?
I have not received any phone calls.
Okay, I'll just remind everybody before I close public comment, we'll give just a few more seconds. All council members should stay on. We do not have to reconvene, correct? Staff has the way to drop off non-council members or anybody who's not properly part of the executive session, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, well, with that, we will close then the public comment on non-agenda items. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention tonight. We are adjourning then the public portion of the meeting. Council members, feel free to take